Well, we know the personal impact of this pandemic is going to be negligible for some and catastrophic for others. The worst hit, financially speaking, will be those people who are unable to work and aren't getting the support they need, who then find their industry is decimated and the impact could last the rest of their lives. The upshot, widening income disparity. Yet governments and central banks are doing quite a bit to try and protect people and their economies. But who's got it right and who's messed up? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Okay, Steve, well, there have been a few different approaches, and we've talked about this in recent weeks. But government stimulus is going to be, I feel, is going to be around for quite a while, isn't it? It's not like everyone's going to go back to work and economies are going to recover, and this mysterious V-shaped recovery that people have talked about, some of them with a serious look on their face. Mm-hmm. We're not going to see that, and there's going to be need for more and more stimulus to see us through the rest of this year and perhaps into next year as well.
Well, probably there is going to be that need, but I've got a feeling that we're going to see governments deciding we're out of the woods and let's go back to our previous austerity-driven behaviour and pull away those supports. We're seeing that in Australia already. What do they call their schemes? The Job Keeper scheme or the Job...
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, Job Keeper. And now, and this is the classic, is the Home Builder scheme. So and this is, which gets back to your favourite topic about, Australia's obsession with housing. So if you are a homeowner in Australia, you can get apply for a grant up to $50,000 to build or renovate properties. And so they're spending $4 billion on basically a tradie rescue package. Got to look after the tradies. So $50,000 grant to all purchasers of newly constructed dwellings, or if you're adding value to your existing home. Mm-hmm. So that is a great scheme for helping those people who've already got the money to be able to afford to buy a new house or can afford to. I think you have to spend something like $150,000 or $200,000 on the improvement to your house. So it's giving money to people with money, basically. Those people who rent get nothing.
But actually...
Crazy.
It isn't just that, like that, the punchline thing with the fact that to get the 50,000, you've got to borrow another 150,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So the government grant is actually encouraging you to borrow money from banks, which of course is one thing Australians should really be doing because they're only number 2 in the world in terms of indebted households, and they've really got to get that number 1 position. And
what a time to do that! What a time to borrow more money when the economy is really struggling.
Which is why I actually got that particular scheme might fall on its face, which would not be a bad thing, of course. But what it means is the money which would have otherwise government money being created to boost the economy again, that 50,000 won't be multiplied by enough homeowners to make much of a difference. So it could be one of those damn squib stimulus packages.
But you mean no one's going to apply for it because they can't get the loan, or they don't want to take out the loan?
Yeah, the ones who will take it out are going to be a dramatic minority of the economy. Whereas in the past, the schemes like the First Home Owners Scheme, First Home Buyer, they call it the First Home Buyers Grant. I've always called it the First Home Vendors Grant because you give $10,000 to the person buying the home and they lever it up by a factor of 10 and give you $100,000. So it gives the person selling the home a 10 times boost over what they would have got without the government's intervention. But with this one, it's such it's such a minority of people can undertake it. Whereas with the first time owners schemes, it's always been a large, the people who aren't yet into there, who are desperate to get a house, who are the ones who are going to go and try to fudge the numbers to take on the very first debt they've taken on after their student debt. But this one, I think there's only a tiny minority of existing homeowners who think it's worth the cost. Why should you drive the value of the house by $200,000?
I'm looking at the Australian newspaper, which obviously is the font of all truth, and they say it's going to create 58,311. They were rather precise. 58,311 new jobs for tradies. This scheme is going to create. And I'm looking at the ABS data for March, which shows construction jobs are down 6%. Actually, one of the least affected sectors. So if you were to look at a sector where you say, okay, it's all about jobs, which one would you pick? I think I'd be picking education, hospitality, and travel. And not tradies, because they actually fared this crisis better than most. And yet the Australian government seems to say if it's for jobs, that's their focus. But obviously it isn't just jobs, is it? It is about elevating house prices. But it's not going to do that, is it? I mean, if you...
Well, I think the market's going to get the Australian. Let's get off the Australian housing market and talk about other stimulus packages in a moment. But I think the Australian market's going to do very nicely out of China, in the sense that China's buyers are no longer going to look at Vancouver anymore, because Vancouver is full of where the virus lives, whereas China is free and Australia is free. So you don't need to worry about pumping up the Australian market. I think it'll happen courtesy of Chinese buyers. But in terms of a stimulus package, which is a bit of a joke, it's definitely one of those. What else you got?
Well, no, just on this, just before we move off this, a cynical journalist friend of mine.
No such thing. Actually, these days,
it's hard to believe.
There aren't enough of them, frankly. They're really gullible these days, but still, yeah.
A guy called Paul, who actually I think listens to this podcast as well.
Yeah.
I won't give his surname, but Paul's argument is that it's money for the tradies ultimately, at least so the tradies think that the government is behind them. But if more money goes into the construction and the individual tradies as well, so doing sort of like those home renovations is going to keep all those home renovation companies afloat. Companies supplying them as well, and they are the biggest advertisers in the Daily Telegraph. So actually, it's and the Daily Telegraph pretty much it's a Murdoch paper which pretty much toes the government line. So his argument
the government what line to toe.
Yeah, exactly. So his argument was, well, it's pretty much propping up the Daily Telegraph advertisers so that the Daily Telegraph can survive through all of this. So actually, it's a grant to Murdoch rather than to the housing sector, if you look at it that way. Okay,
that makes plenty of sense. Yep,
it does. Well, or just an unfortunate.
Well, he's down to his last couple of billion, isn't he?
He's struggling, isn't he? Absolutely.
He's struggling.
Well, and if it comes to propping up Australian newspapers, they've all been making a loss anyway, and Foxtel, but they're all still there for some reason. So he should just bail out of Australia altogether, I would have thought. Now, look, the other schemes are obviously the furloughing workers schemes. That's a sensible approach. That is all about bridging the gap, isn't it? So that you stay attached. I mean, if you're trying to get money out to people quickly, then there's one of two ways, isn't there? One is you just put the money into people's bank accounts. The other one is that you put it into the payroll of the company that normally pays you. Supposedly that's a rapid distribution mechanism. I think that's why it's being picked up by so many countries. It's a quick way to get cash into people's hands, and with the furloughing scheme, then you keep that relationship with the company as well. The problem is how do you back out of it, and that's the danger, isn't it? We're going to see. So in the UK, they've paid 80% of your salary. They're going to drop it down to 60%, but then they're going to want the companies to pay 20% of that 60%, if you see what I mean. Well, or 40. They'll pay 40 and they pay 20 to give you 60% of your salary. So you're actually getting less bit by bit, and the companies are paying more. Reality is going to strike at some point, isn't it? Where companies are saying, well, the only reason we're keeping these people on was because the government was paying. Now we've got to pay more. We're going to get rid of them, and that's when we start to see the real unemployment numbers, I think.
It's a scare, because I mean the extent to which governments have pumped money into the economy during this downturn has been good. It's usual they do the right thing when they're panicking. Trouble when they start to relax, they do the wrong thing again. They go back to believing austerity is necessary and so on. So I can think these schemes are being cut out before they should be cut out. And frankly, we haven't got over the virus anyway, particularly in places like the UK and Europe and America. So I've got a feeling that attempt to pull these schemes out will be premature. We'll see a fall in employment again, a pushback potentially into more quarantine once more, another lockdown at some point, because the lockdowns that were done, particularly by the UK and America, have been pathetic compared to what a lockdown should do. So the virus is going to come back, and then bang, they'll be pushed back into the same situation again. So I see this being a continuous struggle of pulling out too early, causing a downturn and a resurgence in the virus, and going back into the same process again.
Well, yeah, and yet most governments are saying, I think the UK has said it, I think Rishi in the UK has said it, and I think Donald Trump said it in the US, that there won't be, we're not coming back. If there's a second wave, we're not going back to this level of stimulus again. This is a once only offer. Now, whether that's a threat to tell people, you've got to socially distance, or whether they're just saying, no, we're really concerned about the level of government debt that we're racking up. But I can't see it continuing for months on end. Can you?
I can see them always, again, pulling out too early. And this is what I'm worried about seeing. And in the process behind it, what's going to happen in the background of all this is that the level of financial fragility of corporations and individuals are going to get worse. So at some point, we're going to see a collapse in people's capacity to pay their mortgages. outside Australia, which I think will manage to continue its bubble going again, a crash in the housing markets because of mortgagee sales, and also landlords being unable to finance their investments. That in Australia could be a double whammy in the opposite direction because so many landlords deliberately lose money through the negative gearing scheme. So this could get worse again. And I am seeing, just as I'm seeing an increase in excess reserves, which means the Fed is pumping money into the economy, I'm seeing a dramatic increase in corporate debt as well, which to me implies the corporations are being forced to borrow to cover their own cash flow shortfalls. And this is going to make them more fragile. My favourite data series, then again from the Fred, is this is a nice one, TOTCI, T-O-T-C-I, all commercial banks, commercial industrial loans. That has just gone skyward from of the order of 2.4 trillion before the crisis hit to 3 trillion in middle of May. That's just in a 2-month period.
Yeah, and
so again,
a lot of that is government grants, isn't it? But on top of that, you've also got loans that are available, sort of like the favourable loan terms, so that small businesses can supposedly loan their way through this and still have to pay it back, of course, at the end.
Yeah, it's possible, but they're going to find themselves again needing to bail the corporate sector out more than they expect.
So that'll be the same corporate sector that's seen their share prices rising to record highs over recent weeks. Look, there's a lot more to this discussion, a whole 40-minute discussion on the merits of various approaches to handling the impact of COVID-19 on economies around the world. Some of them good, some of them not quite so good, some of them helping the finance sector perhaps more than they're helping those people who are really in need. If you want to hear the full discussion, you need to subscribe at debunkingeconomics.com or become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, back again with Steve for another one fairly soon. Thanks for listening.